There's a lie that almost no one realizes while they're living it, the lie that they're in control of their own life. This might sound strange. After all, you choose where you work, who you associate with, what you post on social media, and what decisions you make every day. But what if I told you that a large part of these choices didn't originate from you? What if many of them were shaped by the fear of rejection, the need for approval, the silent pressure of others' expectations, or simply the inability to bear the discomfort of displeasing someone? Machiavelli understood something that remains frighteningly relevant centuries later. Most people believe they are free, but they live reacting. They react to criticism, they react to opinions, they react to praise. They react to provocations. They react to the fear of losing people, opportunities, or status, and those who live reacting are never truly in control of their own lives. They are merely responding to the invisible commands of others. The truth that few dare to admit is that often it's not your enemies who control you. It's your attachments, your need to be accepted, your fear of being misunderstood, your inability to stand firm when the pressure mounts. That's precisely why some individuals seem to possess an almost unshakable strength, not because they are more intelligent, not because they are richer, but because they have learned a rare skill. Nobody can decide for them. And here's the most controversial part of all. Society teaches you to be agreeable, predictable, available, and understanding all the time. But those who truly master the game of influence follow completely different rules. They understand that better to be feared than loved can mean something much deeper than it seems. It means not surrendering your own destiny to the approval of others. It means building a mind that cannot be bought by praise nor destroyed by criticism. In this video, you'll discover the forbidden mindset that separates those who are led from those who lead. You'll understand why emotional control is a weapon, why silence creates power, why detachment generates freedom, and why true independence scares so many people. Because in the end, the greatest form of power is not controlling others. It's about preventing others from controlling you. If something inside you awakened while listening, don't ignore that feeling. This channel isn't about videos. It's about memories. Remember who you were before the fear, before the exhaustion, before the silence. Each new video here is a different reflection of your own soul. An invitation to understand what the world never taught you. The power you seek outside has always been within you. If you feel that this journey speaks to what lives silently within you, sign up now. Not to follow yet another creator, but to reconnect with something the world tried to make you forget. Because here, every word was made to heal, each reflection to awaken, and each video serves as a reminder. You are not alone on the path back to yourself. Click on subscribe and turn the algorithm into a daily reminder of who you really are. Most people believe that power means having money, status, or influence. But a keen observer of human nature perceives something much deeper. True power begins the moment someone stops reacting automatically to what happens around them. It's curious to note how a simple provocation can cause an intelligent person to completely lose control. A sharp comment, a public criticism, an unexpected rejection, or even an ignored message is enough to transform rational individuals into emotional puppets. Machiavelli understood this extraordinarily well. He knew that politics guided by reality, not by ideals, requires understanding that uncontrolled emotions often give the opponent exactly what they seek: influence over their decisions. When someone can predict their reaction, they can predict their moves. And when they can predict their moves, they begin to control the game. That's why great strategists develop a rare skill. They observe before responding. They understand that impulse may satisfy the ego for a few seconds, but emotional discipline builds advantages that last for years. While many spend energy trying to win arguments, the truly strong are busy winning entire situations. And they almost always do it without raising their voices. Consider a common situation. A professional receives unfair criticism in front of their team. The instinctive reaction would be to immediately retaliate, justify themselves, or engage in conflict. However, those who master their emotions understand that momentary silence offers something precious: time to think. Instead of reacting, they analyze. Instead of exploding, they calculate. This behavior aligns with one of the oldest principles of power: decisions based on real human nature. After all, emotionally impulsive people often act against their own interests. Those who develop virtù and fortuna learn to transform pressure into opportunity. A simple practice can help with this. Before responding to any situation that arouses anger, frustration, or anxiety, wait a few minutes. In important cases, wait until the next day. It seems too simple, but that's exactly where the secret lies. The calculated use of force is not about acting more, but about acting better. Curiously, those who provoke others the most usually depend on the reactions of others to feel strong. When they don't find the expected response, they become disoriented, and it is at this point that an even more powerful skill emerges. Because controlling emotions is only the beginning. There's something that makes a person much harder to manipulate, becoming impossible to decipher. There's a reason why some people always seem to be one step ahead. It's not because they're smarter, stronger, or more influential. Often, it's because no one can predict exactly what they're going to do. Most people give away their thoughts before they even act. They reveal their intentions through words, expressions, repetitive habits, and even the constant need to explain everything. Over time, they become open books, and open books are easy to study. Machiavelli observed that human beings rarely see the world as it really is. They only see patterns. When someone becomes predictable, they become controllable. That's why skilled leaders cultivate a certain degree of mystery, not out of arrogance, but out of strategy. The appearance of virtue often works precisely because people judge what they can see, not what really happens behind the scenes. While many feel the need to announce every plan, every goal, and every move, silent strategists understand something fundamental. The less unnecessary information you provide, the fewer tools you give to those who want to influence your choices. Power grows in the space between what you think and what others are able to discover. See how this happens in everyday life. A person decides to start a business, change careers, or begin a new project. Even before starting, they tell everything to friends, family, and colleagues. Without realizing it, they begin to receive opinions, criticisms, projections of fear, and judgments that contaminate their own vision. Little by little, the plan ceases to be theirs and begins to be shaped by the expectations of others. Those who develop constant adaptability learn to act differently. First they build, then they show. First they test, then they announce. This principle appears repeatedly in the history of great leaders, entrepreneurs, and negotiators. They understand that better to be feared than loved doesn't mean provoking fear aggressively, but generating respect for the impossibility of being completely understood. Predictable people can be led. Unreadable people create caution around them. A simple exercise consists of halving the amount of explanations you offer during a week. Don't explain every decision. Don't justify every choice. Just execute. You will be surprised to realize how many times you were seeking permission disguised as communication. And when that need disappears, a different kind of freedom emerges. Because it's not enough to be difficult to read. It is also necessary to prevent your equilibrium from depending on the people or results around you. Few people realize that dependency is one of the most silent forms of slavery. It rarely appears with obvious chains or impositions. On the contrary, it often presents itself disguised as affection, need, expectation, or even ambition. When someone believes they desperately need a person, an opportunity, or a specific outcome to be happy, they surrender a part of their own power. From that moment on, their emotions cease to be governed by their choices and begin to be governed by circumstances. Machiavelli deeply understood this dynamic. By studying the rise and fall of rulers, he realized that those who depended excessively on allies, favors, or approvals often became vulnerable. This is why great strategists value their own loyal armies. The principle is not limited to the military field. It represents the construction of internal resources capable of sustaining a person even when the world around them changes. Those who develop this strength stop begging for opportunities and start creating them. They stop desperately pursuing certain people and start choosing who deserves to remain close. And this change completely alters how others perceive him. Imagine someone who is emotionally dependent on a single person to feel valued. Every message takes too long to arrive. Every silence becomes a source of anxiety. Every change in behavior seems like a threat. Now compare this situation with someone who has built purpose, healthy friendships, personal goals, and inner confidence. The difference is stark. While one lives reacting to external movements, the other remains centered. This is one of the greatest examples of virtù and fortuna in action. Luck favors those who are not paralyzed by the possibility of loss. A practical exercise consists of identifying areas of life where there is excessive dependence. It could be a person, a job, a social network, or even a constant need for recognition. Then, start building alternatives. Expand your relationships. Develop new skills. Create new sources of opportunity. The more options there are, the less power any single element exerts over you. The end justifies the means, not in the vulgar sense that many interpret it, but in the understanding that freedom requires deliberate and strategic actions. And when someone becomes truly detached, something curious happens. They stop desperately seeking approval. And it is precisely at this point that one of the greatest psychological traps that imprison most people emerges. The need for approval is one of the most sophisticated forms of control that exists. It doesn't require chains, threats, or direct impositions. It's enough for a person to become dependent on the opinions of others to define their own worth. From that moment on, their freedom begins to disappear. They choose words thinking about pleasing others. They make decisions trying to avoid criticism. They adjust their dreams to fit the expectations of others. And without realizing it, they build a life that seems correct in the eyes of others, but profoundly disconnected from who they really are. Machiavelli observed that crowds are volatile. Today they applaud, tomorrow they condemn. Therefore, any individual who bases their identity on external approval will inevitably live in emotional instability. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, teaches that people rarely evaluate you in a completely rational way. Often they project insecurities, envy, fear, or self-interest. Those who don't understand this start chasing an impossible goal, pleasing everyone. And in this race, they sacrifice authenticity, courage, and autonomy. The paradox is that the more someone seeks approval, the less respect they receive, because excessive need transmits dependence. And dependence almost never inspires genuine admiration. Consider how many important decisions are abandoned for fear of others' judgment. People stop undertaking ventures because family members disapprove. They stop moving to a new city because friends criticize them. They stop expressing opinions because they fear rejection. Little by little, they become experts at living the life that others have chosen for them. This is precisely why decisions based on real human nature require psychological independence. A simple exercise can reveal the magnitude of this problem. Ask yourself, if no one could criticize me, what would I do differently tomorrow? The answer often exposes desires that have been suppressed for years. Great leaders, entrepreneurs, and historical transformers have developed the ability to listen to opinions without becoming slaves to them. They understood that better to be feared than loved has a deeper layer. It doesn't always mean generating fear. Often it means possessing enough firmness to keep moving forward, even when approval disappears. True value is born from the coherence between what someone believes and what they practice. And when this need for validation begins to weaken, an even more powerful tool emerges. Because those who don't feel the need to justify themselves discover something that few master: the power of remaining silent. There's a reason why the most influential people are often also the most economical with words. While most feel the need to fill every empty space with explanations, justifications, and opinions, those who understand the dynamics of power have learned to use silence as a strategic tool. Silence is unsettling because it creates uncertainty. And the human mind has an almost obsessive need to fill gaps. When someone talks too much, they reveal intentions, emotions, insecurities, and plans. When they speak only what is necessary, they force others to interpret, imagine, and even project their own expectations. Machiavelli understood that the appearance of virtue and the construction of authority often depended more on what was left unsaid than on the words spoken. A leader who reacts to every criticism demonstrates vulnerability. A leader who responds to every provocation demonstrates excessive availability. But the one who carefully chooses when to speak creates a different presence. Not because they are hiding something, but because they understand that information is power. And power given away unnecessarily ceases to be power. Many people spend years trying to appear strong through grandiose speeches, when in reality, true strength often manifests itself in the ability to remain calm while everyone expects a reaction. Consider an important negotiation. One person makes a proposal and immediately begins to justify, argue, fill the silence, and try to convince the other side. Without realizing it, they weaken their own position. The experienced negotiator, on the other hand, presents their proposal and remains silent. This small space generates discomfort, and it is often in this discomfort that the other party begins to reveal valuable information. The calculated use of force rarely manifests itself through intensity. Most often, it manifests itself through control. A simple exercise consists of consciously reducing your need to respond immediately. In difficult conversations, wait a few seconds before speaking. In provocative messages, wait a few minutes. In important decisions, wait until the emotion subsides. Over time, you will realize something fascinating. Many of the words that seemed indispensable simply don't need to be said. And when you speak less, your words carry more weight. People begin to pay more attention because they know you don't speak impulsively. It's a silent form of authority. However, there is something that still holds many people back. Even when they learn to control their emotions, they become difficult to read and master silence. It is the unseen expectations that continue to create dependency without them realizing it. One of the greatest sources of human suffering lies not in reality, but in the difference between what happens and what one expected to happen. Expectation creates a kind of invisible contract that exists only within one's own mind. A person expects recognition, loyalty, gratitude, reciprocity, opportunities, and expects others to act according to their own standards. When this doesn't happen, frustration arises, and frustration, when repeated over time, transforms into resentment. Machiavelli observed this phenomenon with extreme clarity. He understood that decisions based on real human nature required seeing people as they are, not as we would like them to be. Many personal and professional failures stem precisely from the insistence on believing that the world will follow our internal scripts. Those who constantly expect become emotionally dependent on the behavior of others. Their peace begins to depend on the actions of others. Their mood begins to depend on external results. Their confidence begins to depend on favorable circumstances. And at that moment, control over one's own life begins to silently slip away. The more expectations someone accumulates, the more vulnerable they become to the inevitable disappointments that are part of human existence. Consider a common situation. A person helps friends, family, or colleagues, believing they will receive the same treatment when they need it. They do this without verbalizing it, without planning it, and without realizing they are creating a secret expectation. When reciprocity doesn't happen, they feel betrayed. However, the real problem wasn't the other's attitude. It was the emotional dependence created by the expectation. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, teaches that maturity means acting according to one's own values, without turning every action into a future demand. This doesn't mean becoming cold or indifferent. It means freeing oneself from the constant need for the world to confirm one's expectations so that one feels good. A simple exercise consists of replacing the word expect with the word accept. Instead of expecting someone to recognize your effort, accept that perhaps it will never happen. Instead of expecting everything to work out, accept the possibility of obstacles. Interestingly, this attitude doesn't weaken anyone. On the contrary, it strengthens them, because those who accept the possibilities of reality develop constant adaptability. And adaptable individuals are rarely destroyed by circumstances. They adjust their course and keep moving forward. However, when expectations fade, a new question arises. After all, if you don't control the outcomes, where should you focus your energy? The answer lies in how people perceive you and the story they choose to believe. Most people believe that facts speak for themselves, but history shows something different. Facts matter, but how they are perceived often has an even greater impact. Two individuals can perform the exact same action and receive completely opposite interpretations. This happens because human beings don't just respond to objective reality. They respond primarily to the narrative they are able to construct about that reality. Machiavelli understood this dynamic better than almost any other thinker. He knew that the appearance of virtue often influenced more than virtue itself. Not because truth was irrelevant, but because perception shapes behavior. Those who spend their lives constantly trying to explain themselves send a silent message. They are on the defensive. And those on the defensive usually don't control the game. Powerful people rarely spend energy justifying every decision. They understand that excessive explanations invite judgment, negotiation, and external interference. While many chase approval, trying to convince everyone that they are right, strategists focus their efforts on something much more important: building coherence between actions and identity. Because when actions consistently speak for themselves, explanations become less and less necessary. Observe how this works in practice. Imagine two people who decide to leave a stable job to start their own project. The first spends weeks explaining their decision to friends, relatives, and acquaintances. The more they explain, the more criticism they receive. The more criticism they receive, the more they try to justify their choices. They enter an endless cycle. The second simply works. They don't seek emotional validation. They don't try to convince anyone. They allow the results to speak for themselves when the time is right. This behavior is deeply linked to the principle of better to be feared than loved. Lean, not because it's necessary to intimidate people, but because respect is born much more from conviction than from the pursuit of acceptance. A simple exercise is to observe how many times you feel the need to explain something that doesn't need explaining. Many of these explanations are not communication, they are disguised requests for validation. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, teaches that people form opinions independently of the justifications they receive. Therefore, spending energy trying to control all judgments is an impossible battle. What can be controlled is the consistency of actions, and when someone stops trying to manage the opinions of others, they begin to see something even more important. Certain relationships only survive as long as they exert emotional influence over you. And it is precisely there that the need arises for a difficult decision that many avoid their entire lives. One of life's most uncomfortable truths is that not everyone who stays around us wants us to grow. Some approach us because they appreciate who we are. Others approach us because they benefit from our insecurity, our excessive availability, or our difficulty in setting boundaries. The problem is that these relationships rarely begin in a toxic way. On the contrary, they often emerge wrapped in affection, friendship, romance, or professional partnership. Over time, however, small signs begin to appear. Constant criticism disguised as concern, an excessive need for control, subtle attempts to generate guilt, comments that diminish dreams, ambitions, or achievements. Machiavelli observed that no fortress is truly secure when the enemy is already inside its walls. And in the emotional realm, this means understanding that certain bonds become permanent channels of influence. People who know their weaknesses can, consciously or unconsciously, use them to direct their decisions. This is why strategically strong individuals analyze relationships not only by the affection they receive, but also by the impact these connections have on their freedom. Ultimately, avoiding being hated doesn't mean allowing anyone unrestricted access to your emotional energy. Many spend years trying to save relationships that have become obstacles to their growth. They continue to invest time, attention, and effort in bonds that drain confidence, reduce ambition, and weaken their ability to act. The curious thing is that these relationships often survive thanks to the fear of loss, fear of loneliness, fear of judgment, fear of disappointing someone. But politics guided by reality, not ideals, requires courage to see what is really happening. A simple exercise is to observe how you feel after spending time with certain people. Do you leave more motivated, stronger, and more inspired? Or do you leave more tired, more confused, and more insecure? The answer usually reveals more than lengthy analyses. The calculated use of force doesn't always require dramatic confrontations. Often, it only requires strategic distance, less access, less availability, less influence. Because when someone reduces the power that certain people exert over their mind, they begin to recover parts of themselves that have been silently negotiated for years. And this recovery creates something extremely valuable, an inner stability that doesn't depend on passing circumstances. But there is a final challenge, because cutting harmful ties is important, but insufficient. The real test begins when no one is watching, and discipline needs to continue even without applause, recognition, or immediate reward. There's a trap that destroys more people than failure: overconfidence after a victory. Many believe that discipline is something you acquire once and then maintain automatically. But reality works differently. Discipline is a living organism. When nurtured, it strengthens. When neglected, it silently weakens. Machiavelli understood that even the most powerful rulers could lose everything by abandoning vigilance. Virtue and fortuna walk hand in hand, but fortune changes direction without warning. That's why truly strong individuals never assume they have mastered themselves. They know that the ego is still present, distractions are still present, temptations are still present, laziness is still present, the desire for comfort is still present. The difference is that they have learned to recognize these enemies before they take control. Most people imagine that success creates absolute freedom. In practice, success creates new responsibilities. The more someone evolves, the more they need to protect what they have built, because everything that is not maintained naturally tends to decline. This is not a pessimistic view of life. It's simply an honest observation of real human nature. Observe a high-performance athlete. They don't train intensely only until they win a title and then abandon the habits that got them there. If they do that, they will quickly lose what they have achieved. The same happens with confidence, self-control, emotional intelligence, and psychological independence. Constant adaptability requires daily maintenance. Small, seemingly insignificant choices shape entire destinies over the years. Reading a few pages when no one is asking. Training when there is no motivation. Keeping promises made to oneself even when no one would know if they were broken. These behaviors seem simple, but they are precisely what build a solid identity. Machiavelli often observed that one's own loyal armies were superior to borrowed forces. In personal development, this means depending less on motivation and more on habits. Motivation is emotional. Discipline is structural. Motivation comes and goes. Discipline remains. A powerful exercise consists of creating small, non-negotiable personal rules. Not something grandiose, but simple commitments that are fulfilled every day. Over time, you stop relying solely on willpower and begin to rely on your own character. And when that happens, a level of freedom emerges that few people experience. Because those who control their own choices are no longer easily led by the choices of others. But there is still a stage above that. A level where external influence almost completely loses its ability to determine your path. Few people reach the highest stage of psychological freedom. Most spend their entire lives believing they are making their own decisions, when in reality they are merely responding to the invisible pressures of their environment. They choose careers to please family members. They buy things to impress strangers. They defend opinions to be accepted by groups. They change their behavior to avoid criticism. Without realizing it, they live reacting to external stimuli while calling it a choice. Machiavelli understood that true power did not consist only in influencing others, but mainly in not being influenced by that which weakens one's own judgment. It is here that politics guided by reality, not by ideals, reveals its most sophisticated form. Reality shows that multitudes err, groups err, experts err, traditions err, trends err. Therefore, those who build their identity exclusively on external opinions will inevitably be swept away by the changing moods of society. Freedom begins when someone develops the ability to listen to everything without becoming a hostage to anything, to listen without absorbing, to consider without obeying, to evaluate without submitting. This is the point at which the mind ceases to be a battlefield controlled by external forces and becomes a sovereign territory. Observe how people react when they encounter someone truly independent. Not someone rebellious out of vanity, but someone who thinks for themselves. This type of individual often causes discomfort because their existence silently challenges those who live seeking approval. They don't change direction simply because the majority disagrees. They don't abandon their principles to receive applause. They don't alter their goals to appear more acceptable. Their strength stems from inner coherence. This is exactly what Machiavelli sought to convey through the concepts of virtù and fortuna. Fortuna can change the scenario. It can alter circumstances, opportunities, and challenges. But virtù represents the ability to remain master of oneself, regardless of external conditions. A powerful exercise consists of analyzing your most important decisions of recent years and asking, did I choose this because I truly believed it was the best path or because I feared the opinion of others? The answer may be uncomfortable, but it can also be liberating, because true independence doesn't arise when the world stops pressuring you. It arises when the pressure ceases to determine your choices, and at that moment, all the previous principles come together. Emotional control, ineligibility, detachment, silence, absence of expectations, mastery of the narrative, cutting harmful ties, and discipline cease to be isolated techniques. They transform into a single thing, the ability to govern one's own life. And few forms of power are greater than that. Now, the most important question isn't what you learned in this video. The question is, what are you going to do with this knowledge? Because knowledge without application is merely intellectual entertainment. And the truth is that most people will remain exactly the same after hearing all this. They will continue reacting to criticism. They will continue seeking approval. They will continue allowing emotions, expectations, and external opinions to decide the direction of their own lives. But perhaps you've noticed something different along this journey. Perhaps you've realized that many of the battles you fought in recent years were never against other people. They were against your own fears, against your need for acceptance, against the habit of over-explaining, against clinging to situations, relationships, and outcomes that kept you vulnerable. Machiavelli understood that the greatest mastery was not mastery over kingdoms, it was mastery over oneself, because whoever controls their emotions becomes difficult to manipulate. Whoever controls their desires becomes difficult to buy. Whoever controls their decisions becomes impossible to lead. So reflect honestly. Who is really making the decisions about your life right now? You, or the fear of rejection? You, or the need to please? You, or the expectations of others? Are you, or are your attachments still controlling your choices? Perhaps some of these questions are uncomfortable, but it is precisely in discomfort that transformation begins. Most people avoid these answers because they demand responsibility. They demand abandoning excuses. They demand taking charge. And that is precisely why so few people achieve true freedom. If this video made you think, write in the comments, "I choose to decide for myself." I want to know which principle most impacted your perspective and which habit you intend to start applying today. And if you want to continue learning about strategy, power, human nature, Machiavelli, leadership, and personal development at a level that few people have access to, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because while most people continue to be driven by circumstances, you can learn to steer your own life. The decision, as always, remains yours.